الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سورة التغابن، سورة number 64 and آية number 14. آية number 14 from سورة التغابن. آية number 14. Start with the recitation إن شاء الله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إن من أزواجكم وأولادكم إن من أزواجكم وأولادكم عدوا لكم فاحذروهم وإن تعفوا وتصفحوا وتغفروا وإن تعفوا وتصفحوا وتغفروا فإن الله غفور رحيم. إنما أموالكم وأولادكم فتنة والله عنده أجر عظيم. فاتقوا الله ما استطعتم واسمعوا وأطيعوا وأنفقوا خيرا لأنفسكم ومن يوق شح نفسه ومن يوق شح نفسه فأولئك هم المفلحون. We talked about a number 14 yesterday. And here إنما نون وشدة and then مد أموالكم. Make sure that you have the تشكيل correct. أموالكم وأولادكم فتنة. And if you continue فتنة تنوين after it واو إدغام مضغنة والله عنده إخفاء and then مد أجر عظيم إظهار أجر عظيم and the جيم والسكون makes قلقلة. فاتقوا الله ما استطعتم تاء طاء واسمعوا وأطيعوا give it the proper normal مد of the واو of الجماعة وأنفقوا إخفاء خيرا لأنفسكم تنوين after التلام التنوين after التلام إدغام without غن and then لأنفسكم إخفاء ومن يوق إدغام مضغنة شح نفسه as you see there's no ياء after the قاف so you take it right away ومن يوق شح ومن يوق شح نفسه فأولئك this is the مد هم المفلحون. So the first ayah, ayah number 14, the translation of it: O you who believe, verily among your wives and your children there are enemies for you. Therefore beware of them, but if you pardon them and overlook and forgive, then verily Allah is oft forgiving, most merciful. So this is again a call to the believers that perfects them in what's mentioned in the surah before, assuming that we're carrying with us all of the meaning that are mentioned before. So he says here هذا أن الآية هذا مناسبة has a reason why it was revealed. So of course it has to be understood in that context. and it's not left for the people to interpret it the way they like. So he says in the tafsir هذا تحذير من الله للمؤمنين. This is warning from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the believers. من الاغترار بالأزواج والأولاد. Warning not to be deceived by the spouses and the children. By the spouses and the children. فإن بعضهم عدو بعض. فإن بعضهم عدو بعض. Some of them are enemies to one another. But what is the meaning of enemy? He says والعدو هو الذي يريد لك الشر. The enemy is the one that wants evil for you, wants something bad to happen for you. And of course, the last people on the face of earth that would want to harm you are your immediate family. But when you look at the message of the Quran and the purpose of this life and what the end of things, some, and that's why min, as you see in the verse, inna min, the min here, they call it tab'idiyya. That means the ba'd, some, not all of them, not every spouse, not every child, they are enemy to you. Some of them. So it can happen that openly enmity, there might be there. So that means a person has to be warned against enmity of anyone. But the general meaning of it with regards to the message of the Quran and the purpose of life, the enmity here is with regards to what they would lead you to. They might be the reason for you to enter the hellfire. And if someone is the mean for you to enter the hellfire, he's an enemy to you. Even if he has all kinds of care and compassion towards you, it's a false one. Why? Because what matters is the everlasting one. So then he says, ووظيفتك الحذر ممن هذا أو ممن هذه وصفه, and your job, your وظيفة, is to be warned against anyone that has this wasf, or these characteristics in them. And the beauty of the Quran was the miraculous words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that it shows you who your enemies are in basically characteristics. There are enemies that are known by their name, Iblis, for example. Right? But they're with the characteristics of the people. If someone shows any of these characteristics, it's for the person to warn himself against being an enemy to his own self, or against being enemies to others, by protecting oneself from these evil characteristics and not praising oneself and not just accusing others. And at the same time, when someone shows some of these characteristics, the Quran doesn't leave us by just warning and you deal with it the way you were brought up or according to your norms. No, the Quran would tell you exactly how to deal with your enemies, so you're not left to your desires. And this is a very important one. People, when they have enmity towards someone or something, their emotions, oftentimes, if they don't have the iman and the ilm and the knowledge, would overtake everything. So they would deal with their enemies according to what they feel, even if their feelings are good feelings. They want the deen to be superior. They want the haqq to be established and all of these things. So then how to deal with the enemies of the truth? They leave it to themselves. The Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ in details would explain, and this is even more important than knowing your enemy, or as important, how to deal with them in whatever situation there is, and not always what people might think. This is if someone يضبط هذه المسألة, if someone would perfect this matter, this is one of the means and keys of success in this life and hereafter. Or if he doesn't know, then to ask the people of knowledge. But most of the people with good intentions, they think that they know how to deal with their enemies. They don't refer to the Shara. They don't refer to the deen to set the limits for them and to tell them how to deal with your enemies. And that's a big portion of disobedience to Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and spreading corruption on the face of earth and doing all kinds of evil because of not knowing how to deal with this matter based on ilm, based on knowledge. And they would even go further by accusing the people of knowledge of being cowards or being fooled or whatever there is when they act, these individuals, according to their desires. So just to pay attention to this. And the ayah is an evidence to that. So وظيفتك, your job, الحذر ممن هذه وصف. So warning is nothing physically, to be warned. That means not to be at ease with anyone that shows some of these characteristics. والنفس مجبولة على محبة الأزواج والأولاد. النفس, one's being مجبولة. الجبلة is your طبيعة, your nature. So you're created to have that love and this tendency towards the spouses and the children. This is a natural one. No one can remove that from his heart. So now they're enemies, and at the same time you love them dearly. And the enmity here is because of the matter of the deen, as it's clearly stated. They want you to go to the hellfire, whether they want to do that or by their actions. They become the reason for the person to enter the hellfire by disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to please his spouse or her spouse, by disobeying Allah to please his children, or the children, they disobey Allah to please their parents, but it's usually the other way around, or it doesn't matter. So all of that is to be clear that the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is above all. So then فنصح تعالى عباده أن توجب لهم هذه المحبة. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala نصح, give them that concern, this pure command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that this mahabba, this love that they have naturally to the closest ones to them, توجب, that means it brings by necessity. If you truly love them, what would happen? الانقياد لمطالب الأزواج والأولاد. That you would find yourself following الانقياد, what they ask for, what your spouse, if you love your spouse dearly, what happens as a result of that? You want to fulfill their desires. You want to go after what they want from you. And the same thing for the children. ولو كان فيها ما فيها من المحظور الشرعي, even if it has something that is محظور شرعي, something to be warned religiously, something that you know from the wahy that this is haram for you to do, or excessiveness in a matter that it's not according to the deen of Allah. But the love that you have towards them makes the person follow what they're seeking, even if it's against the deen of Allah. على المطالب, he says, على ما كان فيه من المحظور الشرعي ورغبتهم في امتثال أوامره, ورغبهم في امتثال أوامره. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then gave the believers the raghba, the zeal, to be obedient to the awamir, or to the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or maybe he means here that the person would have the zeal to follow what they ask them to do. وتقديم مرضاتي بما عنده, here I guess it's with the rewards from Allah, that to put forward the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with what's with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala من الأجر العظيم, the great rewards from Allah, المشتمل على المطالب العالية والمحب الغالية. That all the matalib, whatever they ask for, Allah has what's better. If it's the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is much bigger than anything else on the face of earth. وأن يؤثروا الآخرة على الدنيا الفانية المنقضية. And to make إثار, to choose the hereafter over the vanished dunya that would end, المنقضية, the one that would finish. So the heart has to have what? To choose the love of Allah over the love of anything else, to have and to choose the obedience of Allah before anything else, and to have the ithar of the hereafter over this worldly life. This is what's in the heart. The actions according to the commands of Allah. So he says, ولما كان النهي عن طاعة الأزواج والأولاد فيما هو ضرر على العبد, when النهي, the forbiddance to be obedient to the spouses and the children, which is in whatever is harmful on oneself. So it's not about being not following what they seek. Of course you should. This is what necessitates the love that a person has. He goes after what they want, and he's kind to them, and he's doing all kinds of things to them. But if it's harmful to them, if your child asks you for something that is harmful for him, would you fulfill the desire of your child? Or you would refuse even if he cries and he shows so much pain because you did not fulfill to him whatever he seeks, because you know better for him. So this is harmful for him. So you have to be firm, even if he cries, even if he shows that he doesn't like you. Doesn't matter, because of the love that you have towards him, you want the best to him. And the same thing, which is even more important, matters of deen, of course. So والتحذير من ذلك, this قد يوهم, the text or the context of the verse might make a person, الوهم is to think of something when it's not true. It makes a person feels الغلظ عليهم, قد يوهم الغلظ عليهم وعقابهم. That makes the person thinks that he needs to be harsh towards them. They're enemies to you. They're trying to make you disobey Allah, whether intentionally or unintentionally. They want you to go to the hellfire. So that means what? A person, this is the desire comes in place, even with good intentions, that I have to be harsh towards them. وعقابهم, and to punish them. How dare they would want me to fall into the hellfire. This is not the case. This is not how to deal with the situation. This is your desire. But the command of Allah, He says, أمر تعالى بالحذر منهم, that you have to warn yourself so that you don't be at ease. Since it's a loved one, it's okay. That means it's halal by default. No, it doesn't work this way. You have shara, you have deen that you have to refer to first. Even the enmity within your own self against your own self. And not to make taqdeem, not to go ahead before the command of Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So al-hadar, this is number one. Then what's mentioned in the ayah, وَإِن تَعْفُوا وَتَصْفَحُوا وَتَغْفِرُوا. He says, وَالصَّفْحِ عَنْهُمْ وَالْعَفُوا. To let go, to pardon, and to forgive. فإن, we'll talk about the differences. فإن في ذلك, in that, and even if the three words that are mentioned in the ayah, which is وَإِن تَعْفُوا وَتَصْفَحُوا وَتَغْفِرُوا. You can take the three as مؤكدات, as three words that stresses the meaning. One after the other is to overlook, forgive, pardon. You don't have to know the differences between the three. Doesn't matter. We always ask, what's the difference between ta'fu and taghfiru and tasfahu? Right? There is differences in linguistically, but in another sense of it, you don't have to know the meaning of the differences. One of the explanation of it, that it's stressing this fact. It doesn't really matter if it's this or that at the end. The end result is that you would pardon, forgive, and so on. So one meaning of it, that it's stressing that meaning. Because your nafs, if you are a believer, because the ayat of the Quran is all clear. And you should not take a word out of the context of the verse. Who's the call here to? To the believers. So the believers, they act based on their iman. They don't act based on their desires. So they're honored by being a believer. So the believer now is being warned against someone that wants to take from him the most valuable thing in his life, which is al-iman. To decrease it, to take it all completely. The sins weakens the iman. And that's the most valuable thing. Not even the closest one should be a challenge for you when it comes to this. Everybody in the Day of Judgment, come alone. So therefore, you as a result of one's iman and as a result of what's happening, you want to act based on what you feel. So that's why one word after the other, to make sure that you don't act based on what you're desiring, to act based on your iman feeling, but rather based on what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is commanding you. So you have to pardon and you have to forgive. And at the same time, you're warned. So what that means, you would not disobey Allah. You would not compromise your religion. And at the same time, you're forgiving them. You're pardoning them. You're overlooking. That means the end result is a good thing in this life. You protect yourself from sins and themselves also. And to be patient with all of these matters and not to act as if they are enemies in the other sense. So he says here, فإن في ذلك, in these three things, the pardoning and forgiving and so on, من المصالح ما لا يمكن حصره. There are so much benefits in this that we cannot make hasr of it, that we cannot really comprehend. So shaitan will come and say, but if I do this, this is going to happen. Leave the matter to Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that ordered you to act like this. So you have to forgive. And if you have to pardon, you have to overlook. And the benefit that comes from that is beyond what you can imagine. Who's the one that can change the hearts? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you think that you can change the hearts, you're wrong. And this is a very obvious thing. So, but if you follow the commands of Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can change the hearts. or at least you'll be protected. And if the worst thing can happen is, they even separate from one another, but it's going to be the best for you. So to leave the masalih, to leave the benefits, to rely upon Allah. This again, this subject of al-masalih, many fall into sins because of it. Because human beings arrogantly, they don't have to look arrogantly, by the way. We can look the most humble way, but we think that we know what's best for us. Even matters of deen. Or if we don't do it like this, people would think bad of us. So because of the benefit of the deen, we want to, and then you compromise the deen, commits a sin. And we think that this is all for the sake of Allah. It's all desires, it's nothing to do with the deen of Allah. So anyway, فقال وإن تعفوا وتصفحوا وتغفروا فإن الله غفور رحيم لأن الجزاء من جنس العمل. So if you do that, Allah will forgive you, Allah will have mercy on you, because the recompense of one's actions is according to one's actions. So if you forgive, Allah will forgive you. If you make afu, Allah will have afu on you. If tasfah, if you let go, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will let go also of your sins. And that's why the ayah ends with فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. And the end of the verses in the Arabic language, they call it a tadhil from a dhayl, from the tail, right? So meaning the end of the words, end of the sentence is very important, of course. So the end of verses is ilm by itself. You know how the verses ends, and some of the names and attributes of Allah are mentioned related to the meaning of what's mentioned in the verse. It also shows how to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with these names and attributes. So having said that, the linguistic differences between al-afu wal-safh wal-maghfirah is that you have the afu was mentioned first, which is that when you don't punish. The three means no punishment, by the way. So the common thing about the three is that you don't punish. There's no punishment. But the first one, no punishment because of sin or because of something done wrong, after you've already been ready to punish. That means when you're ready to punish, what do? You already decided that you're going to punish that individual. So you would say something. You would frown, right? You would blame them, say, why did you do such a thing? Like something like this. So the afu here comes in place. So even if you said something, even if it shows on your face, pardon, right? So this is one of the levels of acting upon your feelings. But you would pardon even if you reach that state. The second one, which is tasfahu, as-safh is when you leave, when you turn away from the wrongdoer. You turn away from them without even the blame. So you're not into that stage. You turn away from it. So you're not in the stage of frowning and blaming and so on. You just overlooked. Al-i'rad. Taghfiru is to forgive. And al-maghfirah comes from concealing, covering the fault and not to widespread it. Not to say it even to them again. Not to remind them of their shortcomings. You covered it. Someone treat the actions. We should treat actions and speech as a physical thing. When someone says something bad, as if he threw a stone on your face. So these are physical matters, and the actions are the same way, because they come in the day of judgment as physical things. We see it. So al-maghfirah is you cover it. You take it and you cover it. When you cover it, it's not there anymore. You covered it. So you don't remind the people. You don't talk to the other siblings, or you don't talk to the father of your wife, and the wife does not talk to the whole world about what her husband is doing to her. All these types of things. So these three things are to be established. And then he says, فَمَنْ عَفَى عَفَى اللَّهُ عَنْهُ. Whoever pardon, with what al-afu means, Allah will pardon him. And we heard this hadith in the dua in Ramadan. وَمَنْ صَفَحَ صَفَحَ اللَّهُ عَنْهُ. And whoever makes safh, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive him and pardon him, and according to the meaning of as-safh. وَمَنْ غَفَرَ غَفَرَ اللَّهُ لَهُ. And whoever forgive others, Allah will forgive him. وَمَنْ عَامَلَ اللَّهَ فِيمَا يُحِبُّ وَعَامَلَ عِبَادَهُ كَمَا يُحِبُّونَ وَيَنْفَعُهُمْ نَالَ مَحَبَّةَ اللَّهِ ومحبة عباده واستوثق له أمره. This is a valuable advice. It's not easy to practice from the first instant. May Allah forgive us. But this is, if a person act upon this advice, he will be the happiest person in this life and hereafter. Which is من عامل الله فيما يحب. Whoever mu'amala is to deal with. Whoever his relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, according to what Allah loves from him. He just follow the matters of love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, obedience of Allah and so on. وعامل عباده, and he dealt and treated the slaves of Allah, the human beings, كما يحبون, as they love and as is benefiting for them, without contradicting both, right? So because you cannot contradict the two meanings together. The love of Allah comes first and foremost, covers everything. And then a human being, the most beloved to you, or your enemy, you should do whatever they desire, whatever is benefiting for them, as long as it doesn't jeopardize even for the smallest amount of the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your heart, which means the obedience of Allah. And that's not an easy matter. It requires ilm, requires knowledge of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves in every situation that we're in. It requires also tawfiq from Allah, help from Allah for a person to overcome his own nafs and his own desire. And the shaitan work on these two things. This is the misery of the human beings in these two matters. If a person does this, نال محبة Allah, he will attain the love of Allah and محبة عباده, and the love of the human beings also. واستوثق له أمره, his affairs will be well established. And we'll talk about that more inshallah ta'ala, because we need to really make sure that this is not once in a while. This becomes the norm of the person. One last thing is before we, and then we'll talk about it inshallah ta'ala again. Munasabat al-ayah, as we talked about it before, the reason why this verse was revealed, even though the meaning is generally sufficient, but as it's mentioned in the hadith, that these are men, they became Muslims in Mecca. And they wanted to come to the Prophet ﷺ to make hijrah. So their spouses, their children refused. They did not let them to make hijrah. You know, why? Because, and this is one of the most deterrent things for a person. If a person is alone, he doesn't really care. He just go. But wife, children, you're going to leave this, you're going to leave our house and our cars and our wealth and the children and the schools and in Mecca, right? So you're going to leave all of this and go to Al-Madinah, where even the Medina in itself, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man sabara ala la'wa'iha." Whoever is patient with the difficulties of Al-Madinah, even today, Medina, to live in Medina requires patience. So imagine hijrah and leaving and all of this. So as a result of that, these men, they did not renegade away from the deen of Allah, but they did not make the hijrah with the Prophet ﷺ to go to Al-Madinah. So when they came later, so it's not that they refused all the way, but when they came later, after things were well established and so on, رأوا الناس قد فقهوا في الدين. They saw the people, they were with them, they were on the same level of Iman, same level of knowledge. But then when they made hijrah later after them, they saw the same people, companions of the Prophet ﷺ, more in their knowledge of their deen, more in their righteousness, been with the Prophet ﷺ, learning and acting. فهموا أن يعاقبوا. So when they saw this, they became so angry at their spouses and their children, and they wanted to punish them because of what they did to them, or they were the reason for them. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed this ayah. Do not punish them, pardon them, forgive them, overlook. But at the same time, be careful, because they might be the ones that would take you away from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what comes by necessity, the love of Allah. Put forward the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala before everything. How to act upon this? Ask a person on knowledge. That's it. So when a person want to make a decisions with regards to his family and spouses and so on, ask the people of knowledge. Because it's very easy to follow the desires, and the desires can be a religious desire. It can be something based on the love of Allah, you think, or the love of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But that love has to be tied to al-ilm, to how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us to deal with matters. And this ayah is a clear evidence that all of our affairs, that the actions or the reactions of a person has to be also according to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded us to be upon. So we'll stop here, inshallah, we'll continue. Sallallahu sallam ala Muhammad wa sahbihi wa sallam. And today's code is act on iman, not nafs. Act on iman, not nafs. And yeah, first. You can add what's easy for you, and misspellings are okay. One word will be okay, inshallah. More it's time for shuru. Any question that is there? Maybe it's not clear. بارك الله فيكم. سبحانك اللهم ربنا وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.